Thankful, Jesus. I'm so thankful, Jesus. Amen. I want to direct your attention tonight to Genesis chapter 35. We are going to start in verse 16, kind of the middle of 16, and go down to verse 18 tonight. Genesis 35, 16. Rachel travailed, and she had hard labor. And it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said unto her, Fear not, thou shalt have this son also. And it came to pass as her soul was in departing, for she died, that she called his name Benoni, but his father called him Benjamin. For a few moments tonight, I just want to speak to you on the topic, that's not your name. That's not your name. You may be seated. I'm not one of those guys that makes you talk to your neighbor just yet, so you don't have to worry about that. You can breathe a little easy. Might do it a little later, but you never know. How many of you know that naming kids is tough? Sorry, some laughter. This was a very serious story. Before you have kids, you think, oh, it's just going to be, we're going to pick a name. But that's not how it goes. You're naming a human, and they're going to answer to that for the rest of their lives. They're going to have to introduce themselves. So there's no pressure at all. It's just name them whatever you want. Some of you did that. But my wife figured this out early. Since she was a little girl, I'm not throwing her under the bus tonight. So Brother Schobert gave me a stern talking to after last time. So I'm not going to do that. But she had the name figured out as a little girl. She said she called her dolls Rosie Ray. So if we ever had a girl, she would love to name our daughter Rosie Ray. And I heard it and I loved it. And I was like, done, that's it. That's really, really easy. So this naming thing is no problem at all. But there was a problem because we haven't found out who, the gender of the baby rather ahead of time. So we never found that out. So every birth, it was a surprise, which sounds beautiful, but it also means we had to name a human on the spot. And to be fair, we did have a list because my wife didn't like Billy Vince Morgan Stegall Jr. I don't know what's wrong with that name, and I don't have time to get into how my parents named me. There was a divorce. There was a lot going on. It was messy, but Billy Vince Morgan Stegall is my name. And we weren't going to have a junior in our house. So we had about a dozen names, and then there were variations of that name. You guys know how this goes. So it felt like we had like 47 options, because here's what happens. You write down a name, and it sounds great on paper, and then you say it out loud, and it kind of sounds like a dog name, and you're like, we can't name our child that. And then there's other times when you write it down or you say it and you actually like it, and then you remember that guy from high school that has the same name, and you're like, we can't name our son that either because of that guy. He ruined it. And all our babies were born at home on purpose. No hospital, no nurse, no assembly line, just us, a midwife, and eventually the question came, so what's the name? And we're like, well, we've narrowed it down, which we hadn't narrowed it down, but it was like we wanted to believe that, but now we're holding this baby, and it's this incredible, this emotional moment, and it's also a little stressful because we have like 12 names that we've narrowed it down to, and none of them feel just right. And here's what I didn't realize. Even with a home birth, eventually you still have to tell the great state of Texas what you name your child. And there's still paperwork. There's still a deadline. So there's this moment when someone says, I need a name. Day one, we don't have a name. Day two, we don't have a name. Now it's getting a little tense because if you don't name your child, they file that paperwork and your child gets named Baby. First name Baby, last name Stegall. So it's like, I can't say this is Baby Stegall. So the pressure's on, and we're kind of sitting around like it's the NFL draft, and we're on the clock. And the last day comes, and we decide on Brady Vince. And the same thing with Shiloh. Comes down to the last day, clock running out. The list is in front of us, and we're like, okay, Shiloh Luke, we're going with it. Stop thinking about it. This isn't hard. We're just going with it. And here's what we realize. Even when you have a list, even when you have options, naming something is hard because a name isn't just a label. It contributes to their identity. It contributes to meaning. It's who they're going to be known as in most cases. Like sometimes, well, I never forget the day that I met Tom and Lana Lyman right here on the front row. I texted them and said, "Are you going to be here tonight?" Lana almost bailed, but it was General Conference 2022. And we had an exhibit displaying our booth for End Time, showing our resources, and we're doing the show from our exhibit in the exhibit hall. And there was this ridiculously sized poster with Dave, Doug, and I's face on it with our names, and it was embarrassingly large, but it was there. And people would come and watch our show, and they would come by and meet us and meet the team, and they would ask for pictures, and they would ask for Dave's autograph, and all that stuff was going on. And then one day I'm standing there, and here comes Lana. Never met her before. And she says, "Hey, I watch your show every day." I said, "Thanks." She said, "No, I never miss an episode." I said, "Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. How'd you find us?" She said, "Oh, on YouTube. And I really love your show." And I'm like, "Okay, it's getting a little weird. Can you back up a little bit?" "Thanks, but where's security?" She says, "No, you don't understand. I'm your biggest fan, Doug." At this point, I don't know how big my head was, but it really decreased in size. And I said, "I can tell you're my biggest fan because Doug is standing right over there." That's not my name. That's not my name. I go by it in some cases, though, when I want to get away with something. But some of you have been called things by people. Some of you have worn labels that you never asked for. Some of you had believed the names that came from your pain or from your shame or failure or trauma or fear or even family gave you a name. But I came to remind you tonight, you are not who people said you were. You are not even who your past tries to make you out to be. You are who God says you are. And no matter how you walked into this room, if you were discouraged or numb or anxious or confused, God has something for you. So in Genesis 35, we obviously read verses 16 through 18 earlier, but there's a lot going on around these verses and these chapters. And God says to Jacob, "Go up to Bethel and settle there." In other words, go back to that place where you met me. Go back to the place where I spoke to you, where grace found you. Go back to the altar. We should never get tired of going to the altar. We should never be embarrassed to go up to the altar. Whether it be in this room or in a private place in your home. Because the altar, shame breaks at the altar. The altar can be where chains fall off of you. The altar is where your identity can get restored and you never thought it was possible, but something changes at an altar. So God's telling Jacob, you've gone through too much to drift now. Get back to the place where I touched your life. Go back to the altar. It's still the place of healing. It's still the place of surrender. It's still the place where God meets broken people and does some amazing thing. And the reason why this matters is because Genesis 34 is extremely painful. We're not going to read it all tonight. We're not even really going to get into it. I'm just going to tell you it was painful. You can go read it on your own. Genesis 33 ends with this reconciliation. Jacob and Esau, they embrace. There's mercy. There's tears. And there's finally peace after all these years. And then Genesis 34 is just so painful. And if you're following along at all, which I don't expect you to, but I preached in January from Genesis 32 and 33. You probably don't remember that. That's fine. I barely remembered it. But I can't get away from it. So all year long, this story of Jacob and Genesis has been on my mind a lot. I keep reading Genesis. It keeps coming up in books that I'm reading, or I'm reading stuff specifically about it. Then I come home from work one day. I walk in. Brady has a CD player over in the corner, and he's listening to a CD about Jacob and his story. And I'm like, man, this is really weird. I can't get away from this. And so it didn't just happen once, but it's like for weeks, over and over every day, which means he's memorizing the story. And then when we sit down for dinner, he's asking questions about Jacob, and we're talking about it. And so it's just been coming up a lot. In fact, are you willing to come up here, Brady? One time, my grandpa called me up and he made me dance like a lamb. I'm not going to do that to Brady. But what's one of your favorite parts about this story of Jacob? You mind sharing with everybody?
My favorite part is when Jacob wrestled with God. It's just kind of cool to me, and I bet his kids love to hear Dad Jacob tell the story of when he wrestled with God, and I bet he loved to hear the story when Grandpa Jacob wrestled with God.
Okay. Anything else? All right, good job, Brady. I didn't know what he was going to say. I thought, I might do this, and I don't be ready just in case. Last time I did it, I caught him off guard. So Genesis 33, it ends with reconciliation with Jacob and Esau. There's this mercy and this peace. It's wonderful. But Genesis 34, it's like a very dark chapter. There's violation. There's anger, deception, revenge, bloodshed. There's family pain that happens. And what happens right after all that? God calls Jacob back to Bethel. And this is a highlight because when life gets heavy, our instinct is often to isolate. When pain comes, we kind of drift a little bit. When we're disappointed, we kind of disconnect. When things get messy, we shut down. But God says, no, don't run from me in the middle of the pain. Come back to me. Come back to the place where you met me when you were afraid, or when I held you when you were anxious, or when I spoke identity into your life. For Jacob, that was Bethel. But for us, because of the death, burial, and resurrection, that place is available every single day, wherever we're at. We can access it, and we're invited to freely come to Jesus. Back to the place of mercy, back to surrender, back to the place where sin loses its grip on our life. We can access that any time. So if you came in here with pressure or guilt, or you're confused about something, or you just keep struggling with temptation or heartbreak or grief, come back to the altar. Come back to the altar. You're welcome. You're welcome here. And before Jacob takes his family to Bethel, he tells them to do something. He says, get rid of the foreign gods, purify yourselves, and change your clothes. Now, Jacob's not saying clean yourself up so God will love you. He's not saying dress right so you can be accepted. He's saying get your heart ready because transformation is coming. Consecration is coming. Get your heart ready because God's about to do something in you, so you need to be ready. You can come to God exactly as you are, no matter what you've been through. But you're not meant to stay as you are. Come as you are, but things are going to happen. You can come to Him when you're broken. How many have come to Him when you've been broken? When you've been going through addiction, when you feel ashamed, maybe you're numb or angry or exhausted, whatever you came in with, it doesn't matter. But when you encounter the presence of God, something is supposed to change. Change happens in our life. If you walk in heavy, you can walk out with hope. There is hope. I feel like knocking. I love that story Brother Hargrove tells. There is hope. If you walked in buried in shame, you can be covered in grace and things can shift dramatically in your life. If you walked in believing lies, you should walk out knowing some truth. This isn't a place you just attend. It's a place where God can transform you. You don't have to change your clothes to come here. But when you encounter God, it probably ought to change your clothes in some cases. Probably ought to change your language. It probably ought to change your posture, your vision, or it ought to change what you believe about yourself. God says, come as you are, but don't stay as you are. And if there's one person in Jacob's family that especially needed that word, it was Rachel. Because back in Genesis 31, when Jacob's family was leaving Laban's house, Rachel secretly took her father's idol with her. She carried old attachments into a new season that she was going into. And that's what idols always do. They're old loyalties, old things we've been dependent upon, old sources of comfort, old substitutes for God. Rachel looked beautiful on the outside, but she was still carrying hidden things on the inside. Don't we do that sometimes? It's hard for me to look beautiful, but sometimes I carry some bad things on the inside. We all kind of know how to look fine while we're carrying something secret, or we can smile in public, but in private we're a wreck, or we move forward externally while still dragging some old things internally. Rachel carried the idols, and Jacob didn't even know about it. And in that earlier moment, he said, without realizing it, whoever took them will be cursed. He didn't even know his words were falling on his own house. They're going to be cursed. That ought to wake some of us up, because words matter. The things we say matter. The labels we give matter. Names, declarations, they matter. Especially when you're hurt or stressed or you're reacting in fear. Be careful what you say over your life or over your family's life or over your future. Be careful what you say. So Jacob says, bring me the idols. Bring me the earrings. Bring me every attachment to that old life. And then he buries them. That's so powerful. He understood something, because we step into what God has next for us. Some things need to be buried. We've got to bury some things if we're going forward. So some of us don't need more information. We need to have a little funeral. We need to bury old identities. We need to bury some old compromises, some old toxic attachments that we have. We need to bury that version of you that survived through dysfunction, that cannot go where God is trying to take you. You cannot carry dead things into living promises that God has for your life. You cannot be dragging old habits or old mindsets or old relationships or old wounds if God's calling you into something new. At some point, you've got to say, that was then and this is now. I'm burying what cannot go with me. I'm done with it. And it's not always just sinful things. Sometimes it's old seasons or old methods or old memories or the glory days. Sometimes we got to thank God for what he did before, without living your whole life looking backwards. We got to keep going forward. God's just not the God of what was. He's not just the God of what will be. So you can bless that old season. I give honor to all that old stuff. I'm very much in favor of that. I honor the old testimonies that we hear. I love that. I'm grateful for yesterday, but I'm not going to build my house in the museum of yesterday. We've got to move forward. God still has a fresh oil for us. He still has fresh vision and fresh miracles available for me, available for you. There's new things available for us. Sometimes faith looks like burying something. Oh, turn to your neighbor. You look like you're ready for this. Turn to your neighbor and say, bury it. Wow. Bury it. Scripture says that as they set out, the terror of God fell on the surrounding towns, and no one pursued them. See, when Jacob finally moved in God's direction, God's protection followed. Where God directs, God protects. Genesis 34 happened in a place Jacob had no business settling in. And that tragedy was connected to movement outside of the direction of God. So don't build your life based on pressure, or don't move just because everybody else is moving. Don't go just because life says hurry up. Go where God is leading you. The safest place on earth is not the most comfortable place. The safest place is the will of God. And where God directs, he is going to protect you. Where God directs, he protects. Then Jacob gets to Bethel, he builds the altar, and God appears to him again. And God says, your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel. Jacob meant deceiver, manipulator, heel grabber, supplanter. God was saying that may be what people called you. That may be what your past reflects. That may be what your family named you. That may be what your failures reinforced. But that's not who you are. Just because they called you broken doesn't mean broken is your identity. Just because they called you an addict, or maybe you were an addict, doesn't mean that's your identity. Just because you were diagnosed with something doesn't mean that diagnosis has to be your identity moving forward. Just because you failed doesn't mean you're always going to be a failure. Just because you struggled does not mean that struggle is who you are. God says that may be your history, but it's not your identity. He's a name changer. Anybody thankful for that? Has anybody's name been changed? He's a name changer. And through life, we need that reminder, because this was not the first time that he said, not the first time he said that to Jacob. God had already spoken this before, so why repeat it? Because even after God speaks identity, sometimes we still drift back into our old patterns. Even after God speaks truth, we still battle with those old voices that come into our head. You may be saved in a moment, but God continues forming us over a lifetime. There's this wrestling match that we go through for the rest of our life, and every now and then you need a reminder, that's not your name. That's not your name. Then God said something else to Jacob. I am God Almighty, El Shaddai. That's not just a reminder about Jacob's identity. It's a fresh revelation about God's identity, God's nature. Because God calls you to a new season, he often reveals himself in new ways when you're going into new places. See, Jacob had heard of the God of Abraham, of course. He had inherited stories from his dad and his family. He had known the family testimonies. But now God was saying, I'm not just your grandfather's God, I'm your God. When you borrow revelation, those are amazing, but that's not going to sustain you forever. Secondhand faith won't carry you through real battles that we go through. You cannot live the rest of your life on somebody else's encounter. Every generation needs its own revelation of God. Every believer needs their own walk. You can't rely on somebody else. You've got to dig in for yourself. The only way you're going to make it through the rest of your life is you have your own encounter with God. He's not only the God of who was, he's the God of who is. He is with you now. He is faithful now. He's your provider now. He's your protector now. He's enough right now in 2026. This just wasn't for our grandparents. He's available now. And then this takes another painful turn. There's so much of this back and forth. Rachel goes into labor. The birth is hard, so hard that she dies in the process. And with her final breath, she names her son Benoni, son of my sorrow. That's grief speaking, pain speaking, all this trauma and loss, it's speaking. Benoni. Rachel takes what she feels in that moment and she's projecting it into the future. You ever heard of people doing that? You ever done it? Too much. They take one painful season and you make it a permanent identity for your life. You take one heartbreak and you build this whole theology of disappointment. They take one loss and you rename everything after it. But then comes this one of the most powerful lines in this story that I love so much. But his father called him Benjamin. And I'm dying to tell you about Johnny James' sermon, Everybody Has a Butt. I love that message. Some people's butts are big, some people's butts are small. We'll save that for another time. We don't have the time today. Everybody has a butt. I'm sure it's on YouTube. You should go look it up and watch it tonight. But it's one of the most powerful lines in the story. But his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel says sorrow, but Jacob says no. Rachel says pain. Jacob says no. Rachel says this child is going to carry the memory of death, but Jacob says no, that's not your name. Benjamin means son of my right hand, favored son, strength, honor, authority, blessing. Jacob interrupts the label. Some of us are walking through seasons and we need to interrupt the lies that the enemy is speaking into our lives, because if you don't confront the wrong name, you can accidentally build your future around it. We need to interrupt the lies. We have to learn to say, that may be what happened, that may be what was spoken, that may be what fear is suggesting, but that is not what God is saying. That's not your name. You may not be who people say you are, but sometimes we can become who we answer to. Shame starts calling your name and it starts to shape you a little bit. Insecurity starts calling you and reminding you of how you're so inadequate, and that starts leading you and determining your direction. And fear calls you and it trains you into being some way. The enemy's going to say that you're forgotten, that you're unworthy, that you're damaged goods, that you're unqualified, that you keep answering to it. Eventually, those names starts to frame your life. But the moment you realize what your Father has named you, you can't stop responding to this, or you can stop responding to the wrong voice. So when the enemy says, hey, failure, you just say, you got the wrong guy. That's not my name. When shame says, hey, condemned, that's not my name. When accusation says you're unworthy, you say, I've been made righteous in Christ. That's not my name. Stop answering to names that God did not give you. Leave that behind. So Jacob loses Rachel, the woman he loves so much. And in that moment, he has a choice. Will this grief define the future? Will he let this loss become the final word? Will he bury more than a person? Maybe he's going to bury hope as well. But he refuses. He buries Rachel, but he doesn't bury his promise. He doesn't bury his son. He doesn't bury the future. Don't bury your hope with what you lost. Some of us lost some things, and we let that hold us back a little bit. But just because a chapter ended does not mean the story's over. Just because one relationship died does not mean your future has died as well. If one dream fell apart, it does not mean God has run out of resurrection power. Jacob could have obsessed over this. He could have obsessed what he lost. Instead, he chose to steward what was still in front of him. He had faith. Faith feels the loss, but it still makes room for the promise that God's already given us. We're not ignorant. We can acknowledge the loss, but there's still a promise. So now the question can become personal for us. What are you naming the season that you're in? What are you naming it? Are you naming it sorrow? Or are you going, Lord, I'm using this because I'm going to surrender to you? Man, there's some things in my life that maybe I thought I was surrendered in, but now that I'm going through this season, I'm seeing I wasn't fully surrendered to you. Are you naming this season the end? Or are you naming it preparation for what God has next for you? Are you naming it loss? Or are you naming it a place where God's still birthing something? Rachel named him Benoni, but Jacob named him Benjamin. What will you name it? What we name it often shapes how we walk through it. You can look at this season and say, this year, everything really fell apart. Or you can say, this is the year that God stripped the false things in my life. He healed what was broken. He renamed my future. We can call it devastation, but maybe that's not what God's doing in our life. Maybe that's not what he's trying to do it. You can call it a burial, or maybe you can call it a birthplace. What's incredible to me is Rachel's buried near Bethlehem. And Bethlehem could have been remembered as the place of Rachel's death. But that's not what Bethlehem became known for. Bethlehem became known as the place where King David came from, where Jesus was born. I've been there. When we passed through and got to Bethlehem, they didn't say, Rachel, well, there actually is a tomb there where they'll take you. But that's not the highlight of Bethlehem. They're not saying, hey, welcome to where Rachel died. No, people go there because this is where Jesus was born. So it was marked by tears, it was marked by sorrow, but it became a place of promise for people. It was a place of grief, but it turned into a place of glory. Why? Because pain never gets the last word when God's telling the story. That's not where it stops. You don't know yet what God's going to do out of that place that you're hurting in. You don't know the whole story yet. So don't name it too quickly. Don't curse what God still plans to use. He's using it. Jeremiah later speaks about Rachel weeping for her children. It sounds devastating, but the prophecy doesn't stop there. It says, restrain your voice from weeping. There is hope for the future. Not just tears, not just exile, not just sorrow, hope for your future. And maybe that's the word for your life right now. Not that the pain was fake or the loss wasn't real. The grief does matter. But that grief is not the conclusion. There is hope for your future. That's what God is saying. There is hope for your future. That's not your name. Let's stand together. Some of us need to get back to the altar. Some of us need to bury what can't go forward. Some of us need to stop answering to the wrong name. Some of us need to let God remind us of who we are. Some of us need to rename this season that we're in because the enemy wants you to wear a label from your lowest moment of the worst day of your life. But God says that's not your name. You are not your worst day. You are not that wound that you're dealing with. You are not that addiction or that diagnosis, that family dysfunction. That's not you. You are not that failure. You're not the fear. You're not the shame. That's not your name. In Christ, you've been chosen. You are loved and you are forgiven and you are called and redeemed. You've been transformed and you're held by God. You're not abandoned. You are not forgotten. You are not disqualified. So when fear calls your name, don't answer to it. When shame calls your name, don't answer. When defeat calls your name, don't answer. When the past calls your name, close that door. Instead, answer to the voice of God. When he calls you blessed, say, that's me. I'm blessed. I'm chosen. When he calls you beloved, that's me. When he says you're mine, that's what you answer to because you're who he named you. So, tonight I know we come in here and we have false labels and we have old names and we have identities that might have been born through grief or lies from hell that we carry, and every sentence that comes in that we've dealt with through pain. I declare that's not your name. That is all that stuff that's been weighing you down. That's not your name. I believe the Spirit's been speaking all across this room tonight. So if you've been carrying these labels, if you've been carrying this stuff that God never gave you, it's time to go back to the altar. It's time to get back to the altar and stop answering to the names from the pain. So if you need prayer tonight, if you need freedom, healing, surrender, peace, a fresh touch from God, I want you to step out from where you are right now. There's an altar down here. Things happen in this altar. I've experienced it personally. I can testify. Things happen in this altar. So what you step out from where you are, don't overthink it. Don't wait. Just come on right now. If God's been pulling on your heart, respond to what the Lord's speaking to you. This altar's open. Lay down the shame. Lay down the fear. Lay down the grief that's coming your way. Lay down that old identity. Come back to the altar. Come back to the place where God reminds who you are. You don't have to leave here the same way you came. Come back to the altar.